This is Brett Wood. I supervised the creation of the high-def masters of the Saphead, and I wanted to provide a little more information about the two versions that appear on this disc. First, there is what we call the standard version, or the Rohauer version, which was restored in 35mm by Raymond Rohauer, the collector and businessman whom Buster Keaton entrusted with the preservation of his films, and who did a remarkable job of it. Rohauer is a bit of a controversial figure in the world of film preservation. Keaton's films probably wouldn't exist in such good condition were it not for his contributions. Both versions of the Saphead that appear on this disc were derived from elements that Rohauer preserved. We call this the Rohauer version because he added these explanatory titles to the beginning. This version is color-tinted and has a score by Robert Israel, which David Shepard produced in 1995. Also on this disc is what we call the alternate version. It has limited color tinting and a piano score by Ben Modell, composed in 2012. First, I'll explain the major differences between the two versions, and then share some of the fine points of film mastering and digital restoration. It was common in the silent era for the major studios to create two separate 35mm negatives for each film. One was used for the domestic market. The other was shipped overseas and used to create prints for international distribution. Here, we'll put several scenes side by side so you can see how they compare. I've inserted black slugs in order to keep the action in sync. The two negatives do not have the same timing, and so I have to fudge it a little for a proper A-B comparison. It is rare for a film from 1920 to survive in such good condition as the Saphead does. It is even more rare for there to be two original prints struck from the two different negatives. This means that the two versions of the Saphead that appear on this disc are completely different films. Now, if you view one after the other, you might not notice any differences at all. It's true, the differences are very subtle. But if you closely compare the two, you'll find that no two shots are exactly alike in the two versions. Sometimes a studio would shoot as many as 4 negatives for the different territories of world sales. But 2 was the norm. A couple of other things to note. The alternate version required some extra editing in order to make it comprehensible for the viewer. The surviving element had what we call flash titles. This means that the alternate version was probably one created for overseas distribution. Rather than send a negative with all the inner titles intact, the studios would insert a single frame of the title. This saved lab costs, shipping costs, and in some cases, saved the recipient a certain amount of import taxes. Because the title cards would have to be replaced anyway, in German or French, what have you, the flash title provided the text to be translated and served as a placeholder for where the translated intertitle should be inserted. Another thing to point out is the color tinting. You'll notice that the Rohauer version has quite a bit of color tinting. Night scenes, the nightclub, the wedding scenes. In the introductory title that Rohauer created, he says that this version was derived from an original tinted print. I don't think that's entirely true. I'm fairly sure that Rohauer formulated the color tints when he created his 35mm copy. That's usually how it's done, even in the silent era. The tinting is performed in the lab, and the original negative is black and white. Now, before you accuse Rohauer of colorizing the film, let me point out that we know the film was supposed to be tinted. No tinting instructions survive, but there was an important clue found in the raw footage of the alternate version. At a certain point in Reel 3, all the night scenes are cut together. Now, this is not me cutting here, this is how they appear in the original negative. The reason for this is that all the scenes that were supposed to be color tinted were grouped together. That chunk of film would be tinted blue, and then an editor would place them throughout the reel where they belong. And the same thing happened in Reel 4. For this reason, I chose to tint these scenes blue in the alternate version of the Saphead, but only these scenes, because they were the only ones that were cut together out of sequence like this. It may be that other sequences were supposed to be tinted, but I prefer to err on the side of caution. The only disappointment in the surviving versions of the Saphead is that neither one includes the main title. In both cases, what you see at the beginning of the film are recreations, not the originals. That's about all there is to know about the two versions of the Saphead. I can't say that one is better than the other. There's maybe a little more detail in the shadows of the alternate version, but the Rohauer version is a bit cleaner, so it's just a matter of personal preference. I hope you enjoy the movie, whichever version you choose to watch.